Here in New York last night, an estimated 6,000 protesters poured into Times Square. They marched past JP Chase, urging customers to close their accounts. Really amazing photos here. 92 people were arrested in New York, 42 in Midtown. Police say they failed to disperse when warned to do so. They passed out flyers to people asking them to transfer their accounts to financial institutions that, quote, support the 99%. Flyers listed alternatives like credit unions and Amalgamated Bank, described as the nation's only union-owned bank. One group of protesters, this got a lot of play, entered a downtown branch of Citibank. And we have the tape. That's great. LaGuardia Place. According to the bank, they refused to leave after the bank manager asked them to do so. I want to make sure that Citi is saying that they were disruptive and they refused to leave. That is what Citi says about this. The Occupy Wall Street protesters say they wanted to close their accounts. They came in to close their accounts. 24 people were arrested. One woman was apparently arrested simply for being inside Citibank after she told police she was a customer. Check this out.
You were inside. You were inside with everybody else.
I'm a customer.
You were inside. Yes, so you were inside.
I'm a customer.
No.
What are you doing?
What the hell?
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't be dominated right now. He's not doing anything. He's not doing anything wrong. Oh my God. What are you doing? This is wrong. This is wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. Shame!
That clip got a lot of play yesterday for understandable reasons. It's very powerful. And again, I want to make sure, I spent several hours last night trying to track down what actually happened in that bank, and I do not know. So I want to be clear that I do not know the context. But what I do know, and what I think links together what happened yesterday and what we're going to talk about today in terms of the legacy of Dr. King, there's this great quote from Letter from Birmingham Jail, which is one of the great texts in American history. And it's King talking about the sort of purpose of nonviolent direct action. He says, nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to so dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. And I thought about that moment caught on tape at the bank in which the tensions of the system are being dramatized for everyone to see. The most fevered sort of left-wing conspiratorial mind could not cook up the scenario of a New York City police officer, an arm of the state, arresting a customer of a bank because they were, going to close their account.
Yeah. It's pretty stunning. And, in the argument, I think one of the damning things about that tape is, and we don't know exactly what happened there. I watched the tape many times. Citibank is saying that they called because these people were trespassing and they wouldn't leave. She was outside the bank.
Right.
I mean, so she clearly had left.
Right.
And they didn't appreciate it, and they dragged her back in to arrest her. They had locked the other protesters inside. So the idea that they wouldn't leave is questionable at best. Yep. They wanted them to be punished for coming in and protesting by en masse trying to take their money out.
You're from New York, Bob. Have you been surprised? I keep thinking to myself, if Mayor Bloomberg were to hire me as a consultant for how to deal with Occupy Wall Street, I would say, just tell everyone to chill out, don't try to kick the protesters out, and don't have the cops do things like this because it only helps the movement.
That was not going to happen. That would have been the smart thing politically, especially for Bloomberg to do. But I've been following these cops for the longest time, and New York City cops in many cases are absolutely out of control. They harass people. What they've done to young black and Hispanic people, especially men and boys, has been terrible for years with their stop and frisk policies. They have been sort of, especially in the post-September 11th era, they have sort of been given free rein just to keep things under control. And so I'm not surprised that they've reacted this way to the protesters.
Well, let me push back a little bit on that because I've been down at Occupy Wall Street a lot, and I have to say, I feel like the cops are in an impossible position in many cases down there because, for instance, when we were down there we were covering the big march that was last week. You have thousands of people. You don't know where they're heading. At any moment, it could get violent. And there's one thing police officer hates, it's not being in control. And they're not in control. They're outnumbered. And so I do have a lot of sympathy for the actual people that are, the cops that are on the front line trying to manage this situation.
And, I'll tell you, in the lead up to the RNC, we had some cops on our show, and we were talking to them about it, and they were being told, they they were being told that to expect, a full-on Seattle-style riots. And I think to a certain extent, there's a certain amount of poor training within the police department to deal with this stuff.
Well, I'm talking about unprovoked actions by the police. I'm talking about pepper spray in the faces of people who have not done anything provocative. I'm talking about grabbing someone from behind and turning them around and punching the person. I'm talking about the unwarranted use of force. I'm not talking about the fact that cops might react angrily because they've been provoked, because people get in their face and that sort of thing.
I mean, and both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah,
both
that's right.
that it's difficult to do this sort of crowd management question and be a responsible police officer, right? And that we have not only just sort of rogue police officers on the force who may be behaving this way, but a real expectation even from the leadership of certainly not just the New York City police force. I mean, it's something we're dealing with literally with federal intervention in New Orleans. But look, I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to think through this Occupy question because I've gotten a little bit of pushback from pushing back on the show yesterday.
You were proudly fuddy-duddy-esque.
I was proudly fuddy-duddy-esque about it yesterday morning on the show, but then was really watching. And because I'm a professor, I had to go sort of try to think about this in context. So I was rereading Robin Kelly's book, Race Rebels, in part trying to think
as you do.
Yes, as I do. And it was actually really useful for thinking about how occupying space, literally just occupying space, sometimes without the kind of goals that I was asking for yesterday, right? So yesterday I kept saying, well, I need an agenda. I need a set of policy items. But then I went back and was reading, reminding myself that sometimes that comes later, and that part of what democracy, part of democratic action with a little d is simply to say public space belongs to the public, and that it cannot and should not be policed in these ways that say you're only allowed to occupy. So, Robin Kelly's, for example, interested in how even just playing hip-hop music loud in public space is a way where young people in urban centers were able to retake some of the right to be in public when they had been so heavily policed out of those spaces.
The attitude in New York very often, I think most often, is that the police and the Bloomberg administration will allow you to protest, as long as you obey the rules, rather than the idea that people have a right to protest in a free democratic
and the burden
society.
of proof, of course, is on the people that want to stop, who want to sort of interfere with the expression of that protest.
And I think, to a certain extent, this marks sort of the post 9/11 period. Because, honestly, I don't think that you could do this 5 or 6 years ago and have the public on your side. And
we're going to take a look at the legacy of Dr. King and the man who walks in the trail he blazed, Barack Obama, right after this.